Welcome back, everybody, to the Messy City Podcast. Mike Keene, how you doing?
I'm doing good.
Mike is joining us from South Bend, Indiana, and we're going to have a fun conversation here today about his efforts in South Bend, which are really pretty incredible, pretty unique. I feel like, and I'm really happy that you could join me today to do this one.
I'm thrilled to be here, Kevin. Thank you so much.
Well, Mike, I became aware of you really through the work that you've done with Monty Anderson and a lot of the crew from the incremental development world. And obviously, you have a really interesting backstory. Not a whole lot of people are former professors, I guess, that get into real estate development. So, why don't you tell a little bit about who what your background is, and how you came to this kind of crazy world of doing incremental development?
Well, I got my PhD in University of Notre Dame here in South Bend. What's brought me here, uh, geez, back in the early '80s, and then I went to work as a professor of sociology at Indiana University South Bend. I had an almost 30-year career there. The last 8 or 9 years, I had actually moved from sociology to sustainability studies. So I helped build the first triple bottom line, ecologically friendly, socially inclusive, economically sound sustainability studies standalone bachelor's degree in the state of Indiana, and put
Hmm.
that together in 2008. And around 2016, 17, it was largely in place. So I thought, okay, the graduate student helped me, Krista Bailey. She was ready to take the program over. It'd been that long, couldn't have done it without her. So I thought I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna become a sustainability consultant. And oh, by the way, I'm going to help Dwayne Borkholder, who is the president of something called New Energy Homes, who I had met while I was running the program in sustainability studies, build one of his net zero homes. He had found a way to build homes to produce as much energy as they use using a post frame building system. But it was like in the sort of the Apple iPhone. Nobody understood it. So I said, well, we'll build one in my neighborhood. And I said, Dwayne, if you can't sell that for what it's going to cost us to build, I'll buy it and I can rent it out. Now, I knew he couldn't do that because I live in a neighborhood, a mixed neighborhood, that the appraisal gap was such that it was going to cost us $130,000 to build that house. And I would have been able to, he would have been able to sell it for 110 at the time. But the
Hmm.
problem was around the corner was a really old, beat up former flower shop that was kind of probably being used as a drug house. And so I thought, well, we need to fix that up. And we had a whole bunch of vacant lots that were a mess. And I thought, well, we need to pick a few of those up. And within 6 months of leaving the university, I had done one consulting gig, but I owned 7 vacant lots. I had a commitment to build one house, and I was supposed to fix up a old abandoned flower shop. And I didn't know how to do a pro forma. And so our economic development director, guy by the name of Scott Ford, said, Mike, you need to go meet this group called the Incremental Development Alliance. He used to work with Jim Kuhlman. And so I went up to Flint, Michigan. I met Jim, I met Monty, and later on I met Bernice Radel. And I said, we got to bring these folks to South Bend because this is what we need. And so I eventually found a way to get him to come to South Bend about 7 years ago. And we've been working together since then. They've been my mentor. And quite frankly, uh, what I've done is purely based on my ability to learn from them and the mentoring that they've provided me.
So when you're sitting there with like seven vacant lots and other stuff that you're looking at, are you? Does that feel overwhelming at that point? And like, what
At
have
the
I done?
point, a little bit, but not too much, because at the point, um, I knew I could take care of the lots. Uh,
Hmm.
I wasn't a construction guy, but I fixed up my own houses and stuff like that, and I knew I could hire a few people to do the bakery building, and the new house that wasn't going to be my gig. So that you know, uh, I didn't know any better at the time, but then when we went to try to build the new house on the lot, there had been 13 houses on this half block, and
Hmm.
there were now 6 left, and we went to replace those. It took 36 variances, and are a little bit over
Mm.
$10,000. And I'm thinking, oh, Of course, when I went to Flint, they told us, hey guys, most cities it's going to cost you somewhere around 5 to 8 or 9 variances to build what used to be there. Well, maybe it's better I didn't know that before I get started. I might not have done that. Um, and then things just kind of started from there. I mean, one of the things that Monty, has taught us all is you got this thing called the flywheel, and you just get started, and you start a little bit. You try to start on a smaller project, and I had a little bit bigger commitment than we might start with, but I was basically doing a renovation of an existing building, uh, and doing a
Mhm.
little bit at a time. I swore I was never going to become a landlord, but I was about to sell the building and the people ducked out, so I had to become a landlord. I swore I was never going to borrow money. I thought I would just use retirement funding. And then after Monty taught me how to do a pro forma, I looked at the return on investment. I thought, well, that was dumb. So then I started taking out loans. So it was kind of one step at a time as things came along and
Mhm.
opportunities came along.
So, let's talk about the context of this a little bit. I mean, you're in South Bend, Indiana. This is not exactly, Austin or Nashville or, some booming, trendy metropolis. What's the context of the neighborhood? What had been going on in this location and maybe broader in the community for the last, couple of decades?
Well, South Bend was, Studebaker, right? When Studebaker left South Bend, economic and labor historians talk about that being the beginning of the Rust Belt. We were, in some sense, the first city to rust. Uh,
Mhm.
and But as a result of that, we were also one of the early cities to start to kind of figure out how to struggle itself back. Uh, but when I came to South Bend, and I lived in the very neighborhood I'm working in right now, uh, in 1981, uh, this little area in the near northwest neighborhood, we call it, and we're now calling our little area, which used to be a commercial node, Portage Midtown. When I came here, and I lived a few blocks away from this spot where I'm living right now, um, there was a grocery store, a hardware store, a flower shop, a butcher shop, a pizza place, a slot car shop, mower repair. There was a commercial center there. It was the neighborhood node. And over the next between, say, when I got here in 81 and I would say early 1990s, late 1990s, we just watched it slowly disappear to the point where every single commercial element that was there went away. And then some of them eventually got knocked down and turned into vacant lots. And
Mm.
so uh, but the other thing is there's always been kind of this grittiness in South Bend, and so I think one of the things that we learned early on was that we're not going to get Studebaker back. We're not going to get the big factories back. We have to diversify beyond industrialization, and so South Bend, because of its location near Chicago, kind of the biggest city in the northern part of the state, with University of Notre Dame and an Indiana University campus, we began to see education, uh, medicine began to be a big medical center, and some other areas. IT started to be something that began to grow here. And we saw a sort of diversification. Smaller businesses that had always been here just had a struggle to keep on surviving. And then we had a visionary mayor by the name of Steve Lickey. That's not the one people usually think of. Uh, but he spent, over a decade and a half helping to build the infrastructure, and people really didn't see that. But it was an amazing amount of work.
Hmm.
And then another visionary mayor, Pete Buttigieg, comes in,
Mhm.
and basically Pete was able to really build upon that. Steve really focused on strengthening the neighborhood. Pete focused on trying to kind of re-strengthen the downtown. And we've always had this funny kind of fight between the people saying you're doing too much in the neighborhood, not enough downtown. You're doing too much in the downtown, not enough in the
Mhm.
neighborhoods. What I've always felt is you got to have both. And between the two of those two, they really, put a South Bend on a path towards innovation and allowing those folks who are on the ground to really, build it up.
Yeah. So you said the first mayor, Steve, he focused a lot on infrastructure. What all do you mean by that? Like, what specifically did he tackle?
Well, things like trying to deal with the sewer systems. We had a $900 million, sewer water separation problem. He was able to sort of deal with that and also do it in a very creative way with a guy by the name of Gary Gillott, who was our director of public works, and save us about $300 million there. Um, Doing connectivity, starting some of the early bike paths and beginning to put those into place, focusing on building the parks and also strengthening neighborhoods by supporting neighborhood organizations, helping to create and support something called the NRC Neighborhood Resource Center, not for profit, training up neighborhood organizations because Steve came up through the neighborhood. Steve was a carpenter. He was working in, he lives just a couple blocks from me. He was working here, building houses and doing renovation with another CDC. Uh, and when he became a council member and then became mayor, he continued that work. And then when Pete came into office, uh, Pete could see that we also needed to continue to work on downtown, and economic stuff was beginning to turn around. And one of the things that happened under Pete was a world class park. Steve had started to help connect the parks, but Pete helped create a world class park downtown. And we
Hmm.
began to see kind of just the urban remigration that was happening. So we began to see new units begin to build up downtown. We almost had no residential
Hmm.
units downtown. And in the last 6 or 7 years, probably I'd say another 150, 250 units have come up. Quite frankly, downtown is got some very good quality, but some very expensive residential units that didn't exist when I first came to South Bend. South Bend downtown was just it was just almost empty.
How big is South Bend?
104,000. We had actually began to lose our population after Studebaker lost. We had over 135,000. Population fell back to just under 100,000. In the last census, we've seen the first growth. We've had a 3% growth, with about an addition of 3,000. But the big impact of that was because of that loss, we ended up with several thousand vacant and abandoned houses. And so,
Hmm.
uh, one of the things that Mayor Buttigieg did is he created something called 1,000 houses in 1,000 days, where basically he committed to either putting those into hands of somebody to renovate them or knocking them down. Well, about 380 got put in the hands of people for renovation. About 600, uh, 720, uh, 620 ended up being knocked down. Uh, the challenge
Hmm.
with that is that means that just in my northwest neighborhood, over 500 vacant lots. And if you take a look at the tax sale maps in South Bend, it is just dotted with red. And so one of the challenges is that while Mayor Buttigieg has created a plan to sort of get rid of a lot of blight, uh, and controversial in some cases, but many of those houses were just really a mess. The problem is at the time they didn't create a plan of what we're going to do to rebuild that. And when we started to do some of the small scale development here in town, and got Monty and Jim and Bernice to come over and start to do some consulting and teaching us, one of the things we discovered was that there was a lot of things in place that were keeping it from being developed. First of all, large scale developers don't want to come into these neighborhoods because they can't get a block. Uh,
Hmm.
and They're either downtown or they're out in the exurbs, right? This is happening all around the country. Uh, so you're kind of relying on people in the neighborhoods. And we already had some neighbors who were just, out of desperation beginning to do this. But when I began to get involved, like I say, the first problem I run into is I need 36 variances to put 5 or 6 houses back where they
Hmm.
used to be.
Yeah.
That's what we call brain damage. That is going to slow the process down. And then I was getting to build a tiny house on a little 50 by 50 square foot lot. And at the time, this was about 5 or 6 years ago, that was going to probably cost me $140,000 for the whole project. And then I find out I've got my sewer 17 feet below the ground, and it's going to cost me at the time $17,000. Well, that was the whole margin. And so we had to move that project. But then later the city came around and said, well, we're going to start a $20,000 sewer reimbursement project for lots in these
Hmm.
kinds of neighborhoods. Um, and then another problem that we find is if you're trying to build new and you're not renovating, well, you can spend $7,000 to $10,000 on architectural drawings and stuff like that. Again,
Yeah.
that is a big barrier. So that's when they began to work in that particular case with us and Jim Kuhlman and Jennifer Settles to create the pre-approved plan so that now you can go down and get a set of plans that if you build to those plans, basically they're pre-approved and you're ready to go. So what we've had is this kind of working partnership between the small scale development community uh, that the city has come to recognize is, as an aggregate, one of their largest developers and the only one who's doing significant work in the neighborhoods. They've begun to see that that's a serious economic development force that we need to take seriously. One of the challenges was when it was just us out there by ourselves, not knowing each other, then the city would look at this or that person. Even some people who did 10, 15 renovations, they wouldn't see that. But when we begin to take a look at the fact that now there's maybe 17 to 22 of us that kind of know each other and connect each other, and we're working on several hundred properties, have either done it in the past or doing it, all of a sudden you begin to see that, gee, there's some power here. What can we do to
Mhm.
begin to harness and support that ecosystem?
Yeah. I mean, the things you describe, there's a lot there I want to talk more about, but it also kind of strikes me that this is it's such a familiar story to so many Midwestern and Upper Midwestern communities, especially those that had a big industrial base, at some point. Parts of Kansas City, I feel like I could
Yeah,
say the same exact story about that, where we had large industrial economies, neighborhoods that existed to support that industry, and then when the industry went away, the neighborhoods went into decline, and so there's this constant battle and discussion about what do we do about vacant houses, vacant property. How do we build a new economy? How do we create something in the wake of this economy changing? So I say all that to say because I think what you are doing and what your group has done is I think a great inspiration to people in similar communities, really all over the country. That whether it's just a neighborhood in a larger city or maybe the whole city.
well, it really is every place, and and that's why we call it neighborhood evolution, because we're really talking about the need to sort of once again evolve. We did, but I would suggest, as you've observed, that for some cities it was, and particularly Midwest and places like that, um, it was sort of the industrial deindustrialization and other elements. But in many other
Hmm.
cities, larger cities, inner city neighborhoods, redlining and the theft
Yeah.
of intergenerational wealth, was the force
Hmm.
that drove the destruction and deterioration of those neighborhoods. And then the other thing is often overlooked is that the challenges that our rural communities have been having across the entire country, with the transformation from agriculture to industrial
Yeah.
society and now towards information society, a lot of our rural communities are struggling. So, for different social, economic, and international reasons of trade, uh, we see these things happening. But in our estimation, the answer exists in those cities. We
Yeah.
always like to say the cavalry is not coming. And I get calls a lot, and I know the rest of us do too. And they say, well, we don't have anybody who's doing development. And we say, we know you do. They are there. You have to find them, because what happened is when I started, I didn't know anybody was doing this. I helped a neighbor across the street, and we redid a house. We didn't think of ourselves as the small scale developers. We just thought there's a house here that needs to be fixed. It's killing us. And even if we just get out what we put in it, we've helped ourselves. We've helped the neighborhood. When I began to, met Monty and Jim and Bernice, and we started to work here, all of a sudden I began to see there was already 5 or 6 people in my neighborhood, individuals that had been doing projects. And then I began to meet a few others around the city. But again, we didn't know each other. We weren't talking. And what we did in starting to work with the city to start to do the incremental development and our neighborhood evolution consulting and first our workshops and now our 12-step meetings, people started coming out of the woodwork. Either people who were doing this, who weren't connected in, doing it out of hook and crook with credit cards on a monthly basis in neighborhoods everybody was overlooking. or people wanting to get started of all ages. I
Mhm.
mean, I just was meeting with a young kid who's like 24 years old, just came back and is wanting to get going. But I've also got folks who are sort of like me, getting to the point where I call it second life, has had a long life, been successful in another field, come back and can get engaged. And some of those folks want to be developers. Some of them just want to support the ecosystem. We need everybody.
So how did you connect with those first people,
Well,
once you started
it's
going and all?
yeah, it's first of all, it's really hard, but it's even simpler. The hard part is you've got to ask people to come and meet with you. People don't often like to ask. The simple
Hmm.
part is once you make the ask, people want to show up. So what happened to me was I was always a community organizer. That's just been my background. And so whenever I've got involved in anything, I've brought people together. And so when Monty and Jim and then Bernice started coming, every time if one of them would show up in town, I would have a reception at my house. And it started out with 7 people sitting in my living room. And we would just talk about what they were doing, what we were going, so they could come and get to meet, Monty, Jim, Bernice, or whoever else that we might come in. Um, and that group started to grow. And it wasn't just developers. As a matter of fact, most of us who were coming to the meetings weren't developers. There was some people from the city. There's some people from local not-for-profit neighborhood organizations. There were influencers from the neighborhoods, occasionally a banker, some entrepreneurial training folks. And each time folks came over, I would use a very simple instrument. I put their name and their email in a spreadsheet. So the next time we had an event, we would send that out. And oh, by the way, bring anybody you think might be interested. I've kept that spreadsheet till today, and now there's over 200 names on that. Now,
Hmm.
probably about 20 of those, 22 or so, are active developers. But the ecosystem is over 200. And every time we
Yeah.
have a meeting, we put that out there. And now we're getting people not at my house anymore because now the city's helping to organize it. We're getting 70, 80 people show up. The mayor, the council members come and say, hey, we're glad you're here.
So when you say developers, let's talk a little bit about that. What is a developer? Who are the individuals that are coming to these that call themselves developers? Like, what are they actually developing?
Well, we always call them farmers, right? Because what we say is you commit to a place
Yeah.
and you farm it for the rest of your life. But when I'm talking about developer, I'm talking about the person who's actually going to get that house that needs to be hacked or renovated, who are going to buy that vacant lot, clean it up, and at some point maybe try to build something on it. Who are going to, see that commercial building that was left behind on a corner or downtown, acquire it and begin to renovate it. I like to think of us not only as developers, but we that farming idea. We're not in it to flip. We're in it to take time because sometimes if you were going to flip, you're not going to be able to get as much out of it as you put into it. Certainly, my first project, I would have lost $30,000 if I sold it after I fixed it up. But I like to
Hmm.
think of us as the conductors of a symphony. If you think about it, the conductor of a symphony basically has got this whole orchestra, and you need every one of those instruments. But if you don't have the conductor, who maybe has a little bit of a script, right? A little bit of a music score that kind of has an idea of where they're going to bring those folks together. That's what we do. And if you get, 5, 6, 10, 15, 20 conductors working in your underserved neighborhoods, and by the way, sharing the information about, who are the good contractors, who are the bankers who will fund this, what and who do you need to go down to meet with at the city to understand building codes and zoning, and those kinds of things. We're building multiple orchestras that we're all working with throughout our neighborhoods within the city.
Yeah, and so, I guess one of the aspects that I'm getting at, like some of the folks that you would describe as developers might be somebody who's doing like what, one house a year, something like that, or a house
Yeah.
renovation or a new house.
Right. And I mean, some people get started and they'll do a property. That's not for me. Other people do a couple houses
Yeah.
here and there. I would say some of our earliest developers, if you talk about somebody like Joni Downs, Joni's done 9 houses over, I don't know, a decade and a half. If you're talking about John and Brooke have got 5 or 6. If you're talking about Tim Wirechrist has probably done about 25. a couple of former librarians. One of them just left her job 6 months ago. Penny Hill, Jennifer Henneke, and Sarah Hill. They've done 27 properties, and now they've bought a half a block downtown, and they're redoing the
Hmm.
building. Woman by the name of Barbara Turner. Barbara used to help her son in Chicago. She was actually born in a sharecropper's shack, built her first house when she was 23, but in her 60s, my age, she came back to South Bend and she's done a couple of rehabs, and now she's trying to work with other people to do some more. These are our folk.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it's what are there unifying threads at all when that these people have character traits or things that they're interested? I mean, would you say that just a passion for helping their community is a unifying thread?
I would think one of the big things is that desire to want to help their community. The sort of the care, and also a desire. This is how they want to make a living. In some cases, now for those who are going to take the time to become full time, then they're really more focused on, okay, I've got to build my business over time. Some of these folks were just doing it in their neighborhood out of desperation. And for some, like for John Horton, that's become his job. John has five or
Mm.
six properties. He maintains and rents those properties, and that is his job. Somebody like when I talk about Barbara, Barbara's done a couple of houses. Barbara, had like me a career, and so she's got some retirement money, and so she's retired but not retired, right? Barbara's not giving up, so she's working to sort of build houses and making quality housing available in a neighborhood that was redlined and quite frankly ripped off. And so
Yeah.
she's making a difference.
So what is the sort of the blend of people doing new construction versus renovation, would you say?
Um, I would say that we're just starting to get into it. When we talk about the idea of a flywheel, the flywheel applies to seven different elements. It applies to us. When you first start, typically speaking, you don't want to start with new building. It's very complex, and you can get yourself in bigger trouble. The ideal is to start small so that you don't risk too much and you learn as you go. But then you also have got to, get the flywheel going in your farm, your neighborhood. As I said, in my neighborhood, you could not afford to buy a house, build a house for what costs. Uh, you couldn't afford to sell it for what it costs to build. And we're just now getting to a point where if you're willing to build and hold and rent, um, depending if you don't go too big or if you do duplex, triplex, you can make it work that way. Um, and so it's kind of building up yourself, building up what you do in terms of resources, building up your neighborhood that allows us to move in that way. And then the ecosystem itself. Right now, I'm the first one who got into doing small builds, but that's because I had some partners who were, Dwayne Borkholder Building Supplies. He created this new energy home. He wanted to build them, so he was helping me to do that. We now just got a guy by the name of Tom Bard who is going to be doing a duplex in my farm. I sold him one of my lots because he said, I want to build a duplex using new energy home product. So now Tom is jumping into a new build in our neighborhood, and it pencils out if he lives in it with a duplex. And we've got a few others who are getting ready to move into that. It usually, it takes a while to get anything going. And it
Yeah.
seems to me that about 6, 7 years now into developing this small scale development ecosystem, that we're starting to see a couple of us get into new builds. Most people are still doing the renovations. There was so much to renovate in South Bend that you could still do that. Now we're getting to the
Yeah.
point where, quite frankly, there's less of that available. So we're probably going to see more new build happening.
So 6 or 7 years on, like, what are you must be seeing some spin-off effects now in your neighborhood and other neighborhoods. Can you talk about, like, what the sort of the combined effect of all these people working
It
in your
it's
community is?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, and we're working all around in different neighborhoods in the city. But my neighborhood that I know best is probably a good one for me to talk about. Although what Penny Hill is doing downtown in an area south of downtown that nothing had happened for years and years is pretty significant. But in my town, I'm working in my Portage Midtown. It's a 2 block area in the middle of the near northwest neighborhood, and there was no commercial on that block. and there hadn't been a new build house done since World War II. So we
Mm.
built the first two new homes. They were tiny houses, 600 square feet, a little bit bigger, tiny, small. Um, so we built those, but more importantly, that 2 block area that I told you about that used to be our commercial node and had completely disappeared. Well, now we've got a place called Botany, which is an urban garden store. And the guy's doing terrific there. And that was in one of my properties. He's going to buy it in the next year. We've got a place right next to it called the Portage Collective. It's 6 female entrepreneurs who have come together. That was one of our properties we renovated. They've now got 6 businesses there. Our near northwest
Mm.
neighborhood uh, Community Development Corporation, CDC, they're the ones that led all of this for us. They've done 100 houses, but with support, CDC support over the
Hmm.
last 20 years. But they also have a pay it forward coffee house and a local bookstore that is renting out their place. So now all of a sudden, we've got 7 businesses where none used to be. And we could see the impact in terms of you can now buy and renovate a house in our neighborhood, and you can be able to do that. It'll appraise for what it costs you to do that. And we're starting to maybe, as I say, get into the new builds.
Yeah. Was that when you think about the commercial property that you renovated and you've got the great business in there now that's doing well, and you'll probably sell them the building. Is that like a goal or an approach that you have, is to
Yeah.
ultimately sell those properties, have those building owners own them or the business owners own them?
Yeah, we want all of our businesses, business owners, our entrepreneurs. We want them to become owners. We want them to become small scale developers, because that way, when push comes to shove, when COVID or the next recession hits, these people aren't going where. This is their life, and that's how our neighborhood stays strong. That's why we call it an ecosystem. I do not want to be the only developer in my 2 block area. Right now, if I
Yeah.
can, I've got, Tom coming in, I've got Bennett and Sally who just bought one of my properties, and we're going to work with them to get another couple. If Ben takes his, if Portage Collaborative does theirs, we've got 5, 6 developers plus our near northwest neighborhood organization. That's very strong. But let me just give you one other example of impact, because I told you the visual impact, and it's like
Yeah.
night and day. But we actually had Neil Heller from Neighborhood Workshop come in uh, about 4 or 5 years ago and do a third party study, taking a look at what is the value and what is the taxes that are being paid by the properties that we were working on. And it was about 25 properties altogether, 3.12 acres. When we first started in 2015, um, those properties, all of them together, were paying $2,600 a year in
Hmm.
taxes.
Wow.
And people might go, how can that be? Well, that's the kind of neighborhood we were, right? I mean, vacant
Yeah.
lots all over the place, abandoned buildings, abandoned houses. People don't pay taxes on that. Uh,
Yeah.
and then when Neil looked at what we were planning to do over the next 15 years, it turns out that he projects that by 2032, we'll be paying $300,000 a year in taxes on those same things. Now, people might say
Mm.
that's crazy. That's video game stuff. But the fact of the matter is, we are currently now 5 years into it, 1/3 of the way. We have increased the tax we're paid by 5 times. We're paying almost $17,000 a year on what used to be 2,600. So that's one of the reasons that the city understood that they don't get the same bang for their buck. They can spend money on other types of consultants and supporting other types of development projects. They're not getting that kind of tax impact bang for their buck. And that's just our projects. That's not talking about what is the knock-on effect with everything around that has been depressed because of all these empty lots, untended, these
Yeah.
vacant houses, and these buildings abandoned. Now that we bring those back, those are all increasing in their value, and people are investing there as well.
Does the city or the other taxing jurisdictions do any kind of tax abatement as an incentive for any of this development?
There can be some. We didn't get any incentive for anything for my first 5 projects. The 3 renovations and the 2 new builds, there was no tax incentive, rebate incentives. When we started to take on what we call the elephant in the room, a 56,000 square foot abandoned bakery building that had been, deteriorating since 2012 and was really destroying the neighborhood. When we took that on, And we're right in the middle of starting to get that going. Been at it for about a year and a half, 2 years now. Um, then we were able to get some tax abatements. But quite frankly, to begin with, one project at a time, a renovation here, a renovation there, building one tiny house, they didn't see it. Now
Yeah.
they do see it. And in addition, you know, when it was Mike Keene professor that they knew, as a good guy who could teach sociology and sustainability studies and was helping them with their Green Ribbon Commission, you know, they would have looked at me and said, Mike, we're not going to support you because we know you, we love you. You don't know this. But after learning
Yeah.
and developing in my own flywheel, and doing stuff, 3, 4 years into it, they begin to say, okay, we can see something's happening here. And, cities have to make choices about where they put their resources. They're underserved, they're underpaid, they don't have enough time, and they don't have enough money. So what they're looking is where they can leverage. And when they see somebody, in the neighborhoods, wherever it happens to be, making a difference, they're going to come around and help to support that.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about you mentioned the pre-approved buildings for new construction that I know Jen Settle and I think Jen Graham. Is that
Yeah,
the other Jennifer that's
the
working on, or is it just
Jennifers.
Jen
Yeah,
Settle?
they've great female
Yeah.
network of architects do amazing work.
Yeah. So what talk about how did that come together and what's the impact been for new construction? I mean, I asked that because we're in discussions about that here in Kansas City. I've had this discussion numerous times with other cities that they think it sounds like a cool thing to do, but how's it been working on the ground for you all?
You know, we're so early into it. The plans have only been around for not really even 2 years since they've fully been released.
Mhm.
Um, as I say, we've got a duplex going up. I think there's been one or other two projects been built on the basis of it. So I think the story's still out. I think that they have done a couple of things already for certain. They've given us an idea of what good design can look like, uh, and as we get people more built up in the ecosystem who can actually do new build, I think we're going to see more of that. But again, this idea of what we're doing, is that flywheel. It's a slow start, like you're getting a train or a cruise ship going.
Mhm.
It takes a long time to get the momentum, and so I think it's going to be another 3, 4, 5 years before we see that. I think one of the challenges that we've had to face, and I think we're trying to deal with and overcome now, is that for the most part they were designing houses that met some of our historic neighborhoods that were, for the most part, two-story, four squares, 14 to 1,600 square feet. Uh, and they've also developed some duplexes. The challenge is that with the appraisal gaps, we can't get the loans to build these houses in a lot of our neighborhoods.
Hmm.
And some of these houses would not be appropriate in some of our neighborhoods. So one of the things that we've seen most recently, is they're working on, I think, like an 800 square foot unit. Uh, and we also have to deal with, how people see the neighborhood. Some people think that we have to build the neighborhoods back exactly the way they were. Well, when these neighborhoods were built, they were built for families of 5, 6, 7. Uh,
Yeah.
and now we know that the average household unit is two or less. And so we can't be building houses that are meant for family of 5 and then expecting
Yeah.
folks to be able to move into those and pay for those and maintain them. So there's some mismatches that we're all trying to work on in all the different sectors: the city, the CDCs, Habitat for Humanity, and us private developers. I think all have to rethink, what does housing look like? What do our homing, our household units look like? And how do we begin to respond to those needs? And we maybe have to not let the past completely dictate what we're doing now or going future. How are we going to change?
Yeah. Yeah. Those are great thoughts. Who tell me more about who are the people that are moving into the houses that you all have either renovated or built? Are they kind of a mixture demographically? Where are they coming from, South Bend or other places?
It's a mixture. It's a mixture. I mean, uh, for us, we're building market rate. And so market rate means that, at $220 a square foot, if I build a 1,000 square foot house, I've got to get somebody, who come in at $220,000, which means they have to have a median household income of at least $70,000. Median household income in South Bend is 46,000. So, we're basically seeing, young professionals and uh, empty nesters who wanting to sort of downsize a bit, maybe come back to the neighborhood. One of the things we've seen in South Bend is a fair number, not a huge, but a fair, healthy number of people who've come from other communities to go to our colleges and universities staying here. One of the more exciting
Hmm.
things is we've seen a lot of people coming back, people who grew up here, went away from South Bend. Indiana had a huge brain drain. South Bend did too, but now they're coming back, particularly and been out and they see what's happening in South Bend and they think, wow, this is a place I can be. I know why they left because I came here, to go to graduate school. There was nothing here. I mean, there was really
Yeah.
nothing here. But now it's a thriving town. You can go to any kind of food you want. It's here. The concert scene, the theater scene. It's amazing. The sort of gamer scene. It's happening. There's a budding club scene. It's a great community to raise a family. The bikes and the bikeways. It's really just a place where you can be. It used to be if I want to get Thai food, I'd have to travel to Chicago. And I remember when I go to
Hmm.
conferences, I love Thai food. Anytime I went to an academic conference, I'd go to a Thai restaurant because there wasn't around South End. We got two or three now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. So tell me about what's some of the stuff. Obviously, this is an enormous career change for you. Even though I know you had an interest in sustainability and everything, I can't help but wonder, like, what are some of the things that have surprised you? What there's great opportunities. You've got a ton of excitement, enthusiasm for what you're doing, but what are like surprises and challenges that you felt just personally getting into all this?
Um, I think, learning not to make these absolute statements. First of all, when you're an academic, right, the business world is kind of out there. It might even be kind of the enemy, the evil, right? We're not about making money. We're about, teaching people and blah, blah, blah. Um, so sort of having to understand uh, that if you're going to do something, and I, I'm a privileged white guy. I had a good academic career. I've got a decent retirement, but I'm not trying to do this for myself. I'm trying to do things in such a way that other people can replicate it, which means that I have to do something in a way that is going to, make enough money to pay me and pay others. Now, right now, what's happening is the money I'm making is going into equity because we keep on plugging it in. Um,
Mhm.
but one of the things for me was to have to understand that. To have to understand if I want to do good, I still have to make enough money to pay for my time, to pay for my materials, and pay for everybody else. And if I'm going to get investments, uh, pay for my money. And like I said, I said I'll never take out a loan. Well, I've learned differently. But if you're going to take out a loan, you know what? You got to make your rents work. And a lot of people in the neighborhood think, oh, this is magic. Hey, Mike, let's turn that big bakery into a gym for some local kids to play in. I'd love to do that. But at so many thousand square feet, who's going to pay the five, six, $7,000 a month to do that? And if we don't have somebody who can do that, then we go bankrupt and this place goes back to where it was. So that was one of the things, is trying to understand how the private sector works. And what I think is that what we need is the private and the public sector work together, because the university, we sit there and we talk about stuff, we're paid, we create ideas, we give them away, but we don't think about their economic impact. In the private sector, people are so damn busy just trying to pay their bills and make a buck, they don't have a time to dream and think about and share information as much. For me, I'm in this kind of weird place. I'm not really an academic. I'm not really in a private sector business person. I'm sort of in this middle place. But what I found out is that's the place we need to be. We need these two groups to understand. We need to have that time to be able to think, and we need to give away and share what we have, not charge for everything. On the other hand, we need to make sure we get paid a decent amount of money so that we can also pay people we're working with a decent amount of money. So I see these two sectors needing to come together. And then if we can add the not-for-profit college, universities, not-for-profits, the public sector, government, and the private sector, it's when those three come together that makes a difference. Another thing for me was, just having a sense of humor and being able to sort of keep calm. Now, I've always been a person who always kind of stepped a little further than I probably should have. Uh, and so that's all right. As long as I can kind of get my breath in, that pushes me. But you got to learn how to get rid of your stress. I mean, I don't spend any time curled up on my couch anymore, but I have
Yeah.
because things happen. The other thing that was hard was to learn how to get good partners. I've had a few partners that they just didn't work out, and it was because we didn't have the same values, and we didn't know each where we're going. And it really is important to sort of know that your values are in the same place, and know that your risk factors are the same. I've got a pretty high risk tolerance. And what we talk about when we talk about small scale investment is whether you're young, middle aged, or older, what we say is don't invest any more than you can afford to lose. So, one of the ways I keep myself from getting too nervous, I've got a significant chunk of my retirement invested in this, but I was lucky enough that I could invest that. If that were to disappear overnight, and it won't because it's real estate, but if it were, my life, my wife's life, uh, would not change. I'd feel stupid about it. I wouldn't be happy about it. But what that means is when the hard time comes, I'm not, like a rat trying to get off the ship. And I'm going to try to take care of my partners. Well, my partners are going to try to do the same thing. We all are sort
Mhm.
of going slow to go faster, and to sort of minimize risk profile. That means you're not going to become a millionaire or a billionaire doing this, overnight, anytime quick. But it also means that you can make a difference. You can make a good living uh, if you take the time to get there.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible thing, Mike, because honestly, most people in your position would probably say, "I've had this nice career, I've got a retirement set up, and I'm gonna, just take some time and enjoy myself and relax and do, pursue hobbies, travel, whatever the case may be, and not decide to, like, roll the dice and invest and almost create a second career for yourself doing something that most people would consider to be really, really risky."
Yeah, and what I'd like to say is that I want to disabuse anybody of the notion that I did this intentionally or knowing ahead of time what was happening. Because when that
Yeah.
happens, people take a look at me, or they take a look at Bernice, or they take a look at Monty, and they say, "Oh my God, you guys are geniuses." No, we're not. Bernice calls herself a girl with a dollar and a dream. And she just had to do something in her neighborhood. Monty started out of desperation where he lived and grew up and didn't want to leave out, and started small and over time slowly developed. I
Yeah.
started because I wanted to help a guy build a house, but I was in a neighborhood that I couldn't get anybody to rent it or buy it if I didn't help fix it up. And then what happens is as your capacity grows and opportunity comes along, you say, well, there's another vacant lot. Oh, there's another house that needs to be done. 6 years, they haven't been able to get tax credits to do that bakery. Okay, that's got to be done. And so for me, it really happened incrementally myself. And that's the whole value of incrementalism. When I talk to people, I don't talk to them, what about, what building do you want to do? What do you want to do here? What I say is, look, there's a woman here in town called Sarah Stewart. She created something called Unity Gardens. She started in 2008 with a half of a lot in the city, growing food that anybody could pick and feed themselves. And people said,
Mm.
Sarah, if you do that, they're going to steal your food and they're going to kick your rear end. Well, Sarah said they can't steal my food because that's the whole idea. It's free. And after 6 or 8 weeks of her literally carrying 50 gallons of water in her truck a day to water that food, if you touch Sarah, they'd kick your rear end. Now, 15 years later, she's just finished construction of a $2 million educational building on a 2 acre Unity Garden, we call it, that the city has, supported with the land, but they raised the money. And if Sarah hadn't started with that one garden, she didn't know what she was going to do. For me, the way I
Yeah.
say it is, I started because I was going to help a guy build a house, and I had a flower shop that needed to be renovated, and so we bought it and we started. And because my drywall guys did a really crappy job, I learned how to caulk. And so, I say, what's your little garden? What's your tube of caulk? What is that first thing you can do in the next 2 to 4 or 5 weeks that makes a difference? Edge your sidewalks. Get two neighbors together and clean up a vacant lot. Put a bench in it. There's any number of things you can do. That starts your flywheel going. And if you don't want to be the developer, that's fine. Just start to clean up. Find somebody else. Support them. You get a couple people together, and other people, particularly these days, are looking for goodness they can be part of, and they will come.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. So, one thing I have to ask about is you kind of started on this journey by try to help build the net zero
Yeah.
house. How how do you think about that concept now, or how have you been able to integrate some of those green energy principles into your projects, or has there been an overlap or at all, or how do
Oh,
you look at
yeah. I
that?
mean, a couple of interesting overlaps. The first overlap I never expected is kind of a big, broad one. When I started teaching sustainability, I ran into a group called the Natural Step. And this was an organization that had started in the mid 1990s before anybody knew what sustainability was. But they had four basic principles based on the laws of physics and stuff like that. Very sophisticated stuff, but they had basic steps you could teach to anybody, in a couple of hours. And their whole point was this is not judgmental and non directive. Here are the things you can do that if you follow these principles, then you can become more sustainable. And you're not going to get judged for not doing it. We're not going to tell you what to do because if I tell you what to do, then once you've got your carry-on tote and your little uh, cup you carry around, you don't know what to do next. But if I give you some principles, like I got to reduce the amount of fossil fuels I take from the Earth's core, there's any number of ways I can do that. So what happens is you also don't try to do it all at once, one step at a time. So here I have been teaching what I now understand was an incremental approach to sustainable development. And one of the companies that started with that, IKEA. They started 20 years ago to make one couch that was sustainable. They're one of the most sustainable companies in the world now. They started one couch. And so then I meet, Monty and Jim and Bernice, and all of a sudden they're talking about incrementalism. And I'm thinking incrementalism and sustainability go like this. And the most sustainable thing you can do is renovate an existing building or fill in an existing lot and use the existing sewer and water lines. So there was a
Yeah.
complete overlap at that level. Now, with the housing business, what has happened is one of the things that we do is we've got our lots, but we're only building using that system. Now, other people in our ecosystem aren't doing that. They build what they want. We've got no problems with that. But for us, we're trying to learn how to build this better and use it more. And so we've built in our farm. We've built two tiny houses. But on that first set of vacant lots I was looking at, that first block that had seven houses missing, Habitat owned three of the lots. We had three, and Habitat had another three. And what happened is we went to Habitat and they said, "Well, hey, Mike, would you like to buy these from us?" I said, "No, I've already got a commitment to buy one. I'm not going to be able to sell. How about this? We'll help you build uh, a house using our system." And my partner gave them a bit of a deal, a discount on the material package, and taught them how to use that system. So the first five houses that actually went up in our neighborhood were Habitat houses, and those are the highest performing houses in the state of Indiana. One of them in particular,
Hmm.
because it was not only a net zero house with solar, but because it was Habitat Carrier donated ground geothermal system, which is you don't need that. A mini split will do you in this, and that's a Habitat family living in a house there. So that was five we did there, and now we've got, as I say, one of our newbies to our small scale development here in South Bend. Although he did commercial development out in California, Tom is building the duplex. So now what we're looking at is the triplex. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to show how you can build out missing middle housing uh, using our net zero system. And we're beginning to get more interest because just like the iPhone, right? Nobody knew what it was. It took a long time for people to start to adapt, but now they are adapting it. But also along the way, you've got to develop it and innovate. So that's kind of where we're working at together. So those two have come together really well. When we built our tiny house, 160 square foot house, we built two of them called the Artist because we designed the original one for an artist. And that got put in our local home show. We won best of show. Our $160,000, 600
Huh.
square foot lofted net zero home beat out $1.5 million lake houses. And the main reason it
Huh.
was a cool design, kind of industrial, and the energy efficiency.
Interesting. So talk to me a little bit about the work that you're doing with Monty and Bernice and all now with neighborhood evolution. I guess you are now trying to help people in other communities and share your lessons learned and help them along the way in their own place.
Yeah, well, like I say, if I had not met them, I wouldn't have been doing this. I probably would have helped that guy build a house. I might have renovated that building. Maybe I might have renovated another building, but I don't see, I don't know that I would have gone much further than that because uh, I knew enough to get myself in trouble, but I didn't know enough how to, dig myself out of the hole and continue to replicate. And they really came with a methodology that Monty now has conceptualized as the 12-step process, and that's what we go around and teach. I think I represent two things. I mean, first of all, after I met them, I started going anywhere I could to see them again. So I heard about the boot camps. I went to Albuquerque and I did a boot camp down there. And then they were doing some work up in Albion. I went there, and then they were over in Detroit, and I went there. At one point, anytime Monty would come to Michigan, he'd fly into South Bend, and I'd say, Monty, I'll drive you along. You pay for my hotel, I'll drive you wherever you got to go, so you don't have to rent a
Hmm.
car. So we kind of joked that this professor was stalking him. Uh, and so I learned all this stuff. And then bringing those folks to South Bend, I kind of became a proof of concept because it was like, okay, here's somebody who hadn't done this stuff, who wasn't a developer, who had no experience. And look what happened in just a period of 5 or 6 years. But I think the one thing I can say that I helped bring to the table, and that is what had been happening when they were going to various places, is they weren't having the happy hour the first night they got there. They weren't bringing people together in the living rooms and then together. So I think I helped sort of bring the idea of getting people together. And so what we found out was that this form of small scale development that we're talking about, aligning the cities, aligning the developers, and aligning the financial community, which is what Monty and Jim and Bernice had done first, working with incremental development, and now neighborhood evolution, that we could bring those together. And the one thing that we do is we don't just do teaching. We're not just teaching folks. We will only work with a community where they're going to bring us into the community. They have champions like Bernice or me or Jim or Monty. There's a champion there. They can connect with other champions in the public, private, not-for-profit sectors, and we help their flywheel getting started, not only with their developers, but with their city and with their ecosystem. Because it's only if you bring these people together, start to identify the people already doing the work, begin to change the playing field, create the canvas that they can work on, and then help get folks together, both in the profit, not-for-profit, and financial sectors, connecting with one another. You get that going, and eventually it becomes like an ecosystem. That's the whole idea. It's
Yeah.
self-directing, it's self-actualizing, it's self-replicating.
Yeah. I mean, Mike, there's just so much about this that I love, and it's just inspiring to see. I think so much is, about in a bigger picture, it's like helping people recreate local economies, and especially local economies that have been devastated, over
Yeah,
many
and
years.
so think about that, right? We're not talking about Rockefeller, right? That's not what we're trying to do. What we're talking about is Jill Smith, who's going to open a little bakery on the corner, and how many Jill and Joe Smiths, are out there? How many Tamikas are out there? How many Jose's are out there? And the folks who built our community, they were not geniuses. They were just people who got up every day, put
Right.
one step in front of the other, started small, and took advantage of opportunity. That's what we are. We're nothing different
Yeah.
from that. What the thing that sort of makes me sometimes frustrated is that we get so much attention for having done so little, right? And it tells us that, you know what, folks, we've got to go back and create this in every community. And again, it's not
Yeah.
rocket science. We can help you get there faster, maybe. But the fact of the matter
Yeah.
is, every single community in this country was built the same way, except for the most recent suburban ones that were drawn on a
Right.
drawing board by engineers and architects. Any city that's more than 40 or 50 years old has got this DNA. So look to your history and just did what those folks that nobody else knows. You know who they are, but they're not famous. They're not geniuses. It's there. It's our brothers, our sisters, our moms, our dads, our grandmothers, grandpas. Those are the folks who did this.
Yeah, no doubt. I've used kind of that point in presentations before, just like even in my own city, talking
Yeah.
about how much our city grew from, say, 1880 to 1910, which is unbelievable explosive growth, amazing neighborhoods built everywhere. And they were all built basically by local people, and
And it couldn't have
almost
been
all
done by a
small
single
scale local
person.
people.
It
Yeah,
couldn't be done by a single
exactly.
person. If it would, it'd look crappy. It would be awful.
Yeah,
But the work you've been doing, is really important too. Talking about house hacking and working, and talking about some of the pink zone and other sorts of things. Once again, what is that? It's just like what we're talking about.
yeah,
It's back to the future, folks. Let's recapture what we used to do. This is what people did. They built a house or they had a store. They lived above. They moved out. They rented above. They built a house. It was a small one.
yeah,
They added on a room. You know, this is how it happened. My grandparents' house started that way. It was one room with a kitchen and a bedroom, and eventually they added to it. That's the way
yeah.
we did this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, it's really inspiring. There's this great video that you all, I think, worked with Strong Towns on to produce that came out recently. I think about a 10-minute or so video about focusing on South Bend. Just incredible production quality, shows the story. I mean, I was so inspired. I shared it on Twitter and got really salty about it, and got a lot of crap for what I said. But it just I think the larger point was just that I felt like the things that you were doing are really showing. I wish more young people would look at places like South Bend, would look at smaller communities, and see these as places to lean into and have incredible lifestyles that they could create for themselves by really devoting themselves to a place and helping manifest that into something bigger. And I think that's part of what you are really showing to people that they can do in communities all over. So
and
I
the
mean, I really
whole
appreciate that.
Yeah, the whole point of the Strong Towns video was exactly that they're looking at a younger demographic, younger than me, i.e.,
Yeah,
20s, 30s, or even 40s, and saying, folks, you can do this. And there's a large number of
yeah,
folks who want to do that. And we just want to say that, all it takes is one step at a time. You don't have to make a genius. You find out what is your tube of caulk, what is your garden box, what is that sidewalk you can edge with a couple of other folks. You start with that. And when you're looking back 5 years from now, you're going to be amazed.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there are so many people who are looking for some form of like meaning in their own lives and in whatever respect. And not to say that this is like substitute for all of that, but leaning into a place and devoting yourself to a community is one way that you can really find a lot of purpose in life. And so I congratulate all
Or
of you in South
yeah,
Bend
or in
for
a
helping
second
show
life,
us that.
as I have.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, Mike, let's wrap it up there. I do like to ask people a final question on my podcast. This is the Messy City podcast. So, is there a community a neighborhood, a city that you think of when I talk about a messy city, which is something maybe a little more organic or bottom up in nature, someplace that you've experienced that you really want to talk about or enjoy or think of for inspiration?
um, I think more, like you say, I think of neighborhoods. One of them I think of about, quite frankly, is a little far fetched, but it's Vienna. Uh, my wife was
Hmm.
born in Berlin. We've got friends and quasi family over there, and what I love about that city is you can just start to walk, uh, and it
Yeah,
is just from one place to the next, one neighborhood to the next. It's just a walkable city, and it's just a great place to be.
that's terrific. Yeah, I think I have actually never been to Vienna, which is surprising in many ways because I've been, I think, all around it and never actually been in Vienna. But
Birthplace of the
one
coffee
day,
house. If that's where coffee house was
absolutely.
born, it had to be a great place.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Well, Mike, thanks so much for taking the time to do this, and look forward to talking again.
Kevin, thank you so much, and thank you for all you do. You're helping create a movement in this country that's really important. And the most important thing we can do is have people like you that can help not only contribute to how we do it through your hacking catalog, but also to help people know that they can do it too by getting the word out. So thank you very much as well.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you. All right, take care, Mike.